Welcome everyone to an update on my progression on Path of Exile 2 on a Freezing Monk, and this is part 4. So in case you're starting off a new monk and you wonder how I progress from the start of the campaign up to this point where I'm now currently doing mapping, so which is an endgame activity, I will include a link in the video description to part 1, 2 and 3 as well, and it's a very comfortable leveling and progression method. I find I never had any real difficulties before. Even doing the first trial of Secamus and trial of Ultimatum wasn't too much of an issue with the build as well. You can see this build is very strong in general mapping. I'm only hitting Ice Strike here, which is sort of like the basic attack, and everything is just exploding instantly. And there's also lightning effects that sometimes rains down on any surviving enemies, and it procs even more explosions after this. So they're right there. So you essentially freeze a group of enemies with the first swing. The second swing shatters all of them really pretty much instantly. Currently, at time of making of this video, I am starting off on Waystone tier 2 and I'm still obliterating enemies. Even rares die just by plopping a Tempest Bell on top of them, and if they happen to survive that, just one hit on the Tempest Bell usually kills the rare. So it is a very comfortable leveling overall, I should say progression overall. This video is going to be a bit longer than the other videos, but I will include timestamps in the video description so you can use those to comfortably navigate around. And the reason why it's longer is I wanted to go into a bit more detail. I did receive feedback before that I didn't even go through enough detail on the support gems and all that. So since this is the start of endgame progression, I thought I will cover into more detail on how the build looks right at the start of endgame. In case you're wondering how the build works in bossing, this build absolutely smacks bosses as well. You're looking at like 10 to 20 second boss fights. This is the boss at the end of Act 3 in the campaign, and just watch at how quickly the boss dies. So that's the end of phase 1. This is phase 2 of the boss. Watch how quickly the boss dies once I freeze him. Boss dead in 11 seconds without doing pretty much anything. Alright, so I'll start off first in this video by going through the rotation and the active attacks and describing how the build works. You've seen most of it in the showcase already, but just a quick description, and then I'll be covering the support skill gems in more detail. So starting off first, this build is pretty simple to play because it only requires 4 active buttons to press, and personally I play on a controller, so just only requiring to press 4 buttons makes it pretty simple to manage overall. The first is Ice Strike, as you can see here. So Ice Strike is your primary attack. It is also the attack that will be infused with Charge Staff. Ice Strike is pretty good obviously because I started off as a Freeze Monk, but because I've taken a lot of freeze build-up passives, usually in normal mapping the first hit already freezes enemies, so after which it's pretty simple to shatter all the frozen enemies, especially since you now have lightning shooting every now and then, which also helps you to shatter. Against bosses, the freeze magnitude is also pretty good because you normally can freeze bosses, even act bosses, within 2 to 3 hits usually. And then you can even refreeze them, you know, after they've recovered from the first freeze pretty quickly, because this build also has a pretty high attack speed. The second attack I mentioned is Charge Staff. So Charge Staff seems odd because I started off as the Freezing Monk, but I'll cover more into why I decided to also branch out into Lightning. There's a couple of reasons why it makes a lot of sense. But Charge Staff is the second button that you press, and the way this build works is that you more or less have unlimited power charges, so you'll never have to worry about Charge Staff falling off. Charge Staff is good because it doesn't actually deduct the cold damage that you do. The way it works is that you get a buff that adds additional lightning damage on top of your Ice Strike. On top of this, you'll also be blasting off shockwaves, which is pure lightning damage, anytime that you hit your Ice Strike. So it adds a lot of damage. Plus, it's also a very cool effect where your quarterstaff sounds like a lightsaber. In Star Wars, anytime you swing, you hear the sort of like a lightsaber effect, which is really very cool. For most of the mapping, these two buttons are enough. The third and fourth button, so the third button I added is Hand of Cayula. The Hand of Cayula I use is mainly to add debuffs on the target, and Hand of Cayula is also a gap closer because it's a palm striking technique. So just to show the debuffs that I have, so I have Freezing Mark and Voltaic Mark. So this is especially good on bosses because it makes them much more susceptible to freeze and shock ailments. And then I also have Hypothermia to reduce cold resistance. So in one press of the button, you get 2 marks and 1 minus cold resistance aura. Once I have 4 slots, I can also include maybe the minus lightning resist aura, although I'm not so sure whether I have enough intelligence yet to sort it in. But this is the main reason why I picked Hand of Cayula. It helps against bosses as well. Now there is an alternative option. You can also, instead of Hand of Cayula, you can use Shattering Palm. I'll just quickly show you Shattering Palm. So you can use Shattering Palm as well as your gap closer. Shattering Palm is better in mapping because it adds the icicles on the enemies, which gives you much more AoE capabilities. But I really don't use it that often because I don't even have this skill at all equipped yet, because you don't really need the additional AoE. As you've seen in the showcase, in general mapping, just spamming Ice Strike really does a lot of AoE damage with your Herald of Ice and Herald of Thunder anyway, that I feel this skill is pretty redundant. I rather have the debuffs from the Hand of Cayula that helps against act bosses, so it just cuts down the killing time on act bosses. The last button, the fourth button, is Tempest Bell. And Tempest Bell is a big nuke. It really does a lot of damage, especially as you put it on top of a boss and you just spam Ice Strike on the bell. The boss dies pretty quickly. So these are the 4 buttons that you use. So looking at the support skills in detail, so for Ice Strike, you have Martial Tempo. This is the most important one. If you are starting off and you only have a few skill slots, you must have Martial Tempo. The 25% attack speed is huge in terms of raw DPS and landing your debuffs and hitting the Tempest Bell, getting enough combo points for the Tempest Bell as well. Primal Armament is a good DPS increase for Ice Strike. Ice Bite, because your first hit with Ice Strike more or less freezes the mobs, so you will have a lot of uptime on the 35% damage bonus. You can put Ice Bite somewhere else as well and it will affect Ice Strike, so if you are lacking on slots, I would recommend putting Ice Bite somewhere else. But the reason why it's on Ice Strike for me is Ice Strike is the most reliable way I have of freezing enemies. And finally is Rage. So Rage is also the optional one. There are other options that you can use in place of Rage, but because I have very fast attack speed, so as I'm hitting enemies, I build up rage stacks really quickly. The other alternative, so in case you don't really like the rage mechanic, Practice Combo is also pretty good because this build has a fast attack speed, and with Practice Combo you'll be able to get to Tempest Bell much more quickly. And there is a DPS factor in this as well because I have overabundance support on Tempest Bell. I'll cover that soon after this. But overabundance lets you place up to 2 Tempest Bell at once, and with Practice Combo you can very fast build the combo points required for it, and having 2 Tempest Bell on top of a boss is very big damage overall. Lastly, if you really don't want to, you can also put in concentrated effects. So I currently have it on my Tempest Bell, but another option is to place these on Ice Strike as well to drastically boost the damage. But I'm not really a big fan of the reduction of the area of effect. And since I'm not using Shattering Palm, I decide to try to maintain the AoE on Ice Strike as much as possible. So which brings me, I guess, to Tempest Bell. So Tempest Bell, before I cover Tempest Bell, so just quickly mentioning about the skill slots, support slots here. Now the Lesser Jeweler Orb adds the third support slot, but to get the fourth one, you normally need a Greater Jeweler's Orb, and that is extremely rare. In fact, I've reached to tier 2 endgame mapping and I haven't found any Greater Jeweler's Orb yet. So the way you get the fourth slot alternatively is get a bunch of lower ranked skill gems, uncut skill gems, engrave Ice Strike a couple of times to get a few copies, and then use a Lesser Jeweler's Orb to get the third support skill slot, and then use a Veil's Orb on it to corrupt it. Sometimes when using a Veil's Orb, you can get a fourth slot, after which you can just use your highest rank skill gem to upgrade it to the highest rank, and hey presto, you have a 4 slot Ice Strike. So if you have excess Veil Orbs and Lesser Jeweler's Orb, I would highly recommend to try to get a 4 slot Ice Strike. It doesn't really take that much, took me like 4 or 5 tries and I got this. So coming back to Tempest Bell, so for Tempest Bell, Overabundance seems strange, but trust me, I really like this skill a lot. It will be my number 1 pick if you have limited slots for Tempest Bell, especially if you decide to go for attack speed. So the +1 limit is pretty good if you are attacking fast enough. I have done a few times where in bosses I have 2 Tempest Bells up on the boss, and if they don't move out of it, they die pretty quickly. It essentially doubles the damage of your Tempest Bell so long as both are up. Concentrated effect, this one I'm still on the fence. The damage increase is a lot, but the problem is that the reduction of AoE pretty much makes your Tempest Bell a melee attack. So in bosses where they don't move a lot, this is ideal, but in bosses where they jump around the room, then it's very hard to actually position the bell accordingly. So this support skill is a matter of taste. Close combat, I think, is a no-brainer, especially if you're going for concentrated effect anyway. If you want to place the bell close by, you might as well also slot in close combat. Other alternatives, if you don't want this, you can put in Rage. If you don't want it on Ice Strike, you can put it here. You can also put in Rage of Font of Rage, sorry. For a moment I couldn't remember the name there. So Font of Rage helps you generate even more rage and reduces the decay of rage, so it combos very well if you have rage here. You can also put in Cold Infusion, before I forget, you can also put in Cold Infusion on your Tempest Bell for DPS increase, but that comes at a cost of lesser lightning damage. So once you branch out to lightning, I recommend not to use Cold Infusion on your melee attacks. I do have it slotted somewhere else. Hand of Chayula I already mentioned, so you want a debuff, so the 2 freezing and voltaic mark as well as hypothermia, pretty self-explanatory. Now the next ones are next one is Charge Staff. So Charge Staff is the last button that you press. All the other skills here are all passives and I'll cover them shortly. So Persistence is pretty key. It just makes Charge Staff last longer, so you don't have to press it as often, and it's a good quality of life thing. Conduction, this helps tremendously because the focus of the build is still on cold damage, so having Conduction helps you land Shock much more easily. And Shock is a great debuff because it increases damage taken by the enemies by 20%, so in essence this increases the damage of the Ice Strike and Tempest Bell by 20%. So Innervate is the equivalent to Cold Infusion, but it's on lightning. So I put this on the Charge Bell, on the Charge Staff to get more lightning damage overall. So greater lightning damage equals to greater chance to shock, because shock relies on the quantity of lightning damage that you do as well. So this just helps you push out more damage as well as land more shocks. So going to the passives next, and for the passives, it takes up a lot of spirit. And in case you're wondering how I get that much spirit, so the key is in, I'll just jump quickly here, it's in this passive node right here. So for the second time you clear the Trial of Ultimatum, or I should say first time Trial of Second Mass, the second time Trial of Ultimatum, you can unlock the third and fourth passive point for your Ascendancy, and you should go for this Lead Me Through Grace, because this gives you free spirit per evasion point on your body armor. And if you just equip a good enough body armor, and you can get them for pretty cheap on the Path of Exile trading site. So this one that you see here I got for 2 Exalted Orbs only. Obviously I had to socket it myself and all that, but the sockets and the runes are pretty easy to come by anyway. So with this 1400 evasion, I have enough spirit. You don't even need 1400, roughly about 1000 should be enough to equip all the passives. But the more is better, because you also want to equip support skills that require spirit. So I would recommend about 1004, 1005 if you can find it. Otherwise, go for 1000 and make do without some of the support skills. Some of them are just more quality of life than damage anyway. So once you have that, you can equip all your passives. If you don't have enough spirit, you don't have to equip all of them. Some of them just helps in survivability. The most important is Combat Frenzy, because Combat Frenzy is how you get your unlimited power charge. Normally Combat Frenzy gives you Frenzy charge, but because I have also this passive right here, Resonance. So Resonance changes all Frenzy charges to power charges. So with Combat Frenzy, anytime you freeze an enemy, which is pretty much all the time, every time, you get a power charge, so you have unlimited power charges. You need this to have uptime on your charge staff. I have Profusion to help with the charges, so that's a good quality of life thing. And then Cannibalism and Clarity, this helps a lot in sustaining your life and mana. So Cannibalism is good because before this I used to have to take passives in the passive tree to give me life on kill. With this you can refund those points and put it on other nodes instead. So this helps you save like 3 or 4 passive points. And it's very nice because you might be taking some damage as you rush into a pack of mobs, but the moment the pack explodes, you are at full life again. Clarity is there to help you sustain mana, because I also have a whopping +6 to melee skills on my weapon, so the skill mana requirement is pretty high. So next up, the second most important buff is your Herald of Ice, because I do also have the passive that gives you 50% cold damage if you have Herald of Ice equipped, so you do want to go for this after Combat Frenzy. So Herald of Ice, there's a few ways you can build this. Some people go for more damage oriented, but I feel that I don't really need it, because the Herald of Ice procs only when you shatter an enemy, and usually when you shatter an enemy, all other enemies shatter together already. You don't need like a lot of damage bonus for Herald of Ice for that to work. So I said go for more support style Herald of Ice. So I have Frost Nexus to create shield grounds. I have Blind, so all explosions will blind enemies, and that helps you in survivability. And I have Cold Infusion here, so this is where I slot in for damage. You could go for pure support by having Maim, but because I don't want to let Cold Infusion go to waste, and Herald of Ice does predominantly cold damage, so it's 100% of physical damage converted to cold, so the downside doesn't play here. So this is the perfect place to put Cold Infusion. Now the third most important one after that would be, it depends actually. I would recommend Herald of Thunder, because the same passive node that gives you the 50% damage to cold damage also gives you 50% lightning damage right here. So you get the extra 50% lightning damage without doing anything else, it's already there. So making the Herald of Thunder a no-brainer for the third passive. So Herald of Thunder is additional damage, additional lightning damage, which means much more easier time to shock. So I have lightning infusion here, so same reason for the cold infusion. Then I have maim, so for support ability. And for the third slot, I'm still undecided. I tried to put execute here because I was thinking that, you know, if there's any monster still surviving the explosions and AoE, and then Herald of Thunder gets triggered, then execute usually will come into play as well. You can put more shock supports here if you want to, so the third slot is really optional. So the fourth and fifth passives are pretty optional, and this just depends on whether or not you have the spirit to spare. After Herald of Thunder, I would recommend Wind Dancer. Wind Dancer gives you more evasion, which is a no-brainer. With this, my evasion skyrockets. I'm now sitting at 16,000 evasion for an 89% chance to evade. So I'm sort of evading most attacks anyway. And then I just have Magnified Effect here because why not? I really haven't put in any gems here. Wind Dancer is classified as an attack buff, so you can put in gems that support attack, but really it will only come into play when Wind Dancer gets triggered, and I don't really place a lot of priority on buffing the Gale triggered by Wind Dancer. The main reason I take this is more for the evasion than the triggered attack anyway. And then finally is Ghost Dance. Ghost Dance is only useful if you have energy shield, so if you went all evasion then you can't use this, but I'll cover the gear later. So with Ghost Dance I have fast forward. This just makes it more often that you get the Ghost Dance shrouds, the ghost shrouds. And then I have precision, so I have spare spirit, so that's what I went for. I would actually like to take vitality, but I'm one spirit short. I have 9 spare spirit. If I have one more spirit, I will remove precision and put in vitality instead. That's it for the support skills. Okay, so coming to passives, and this is also where I would want to remind that, you know, if you are still leveling up and you haven't gotten to, you know, like late level 60s or early level 70s to get enough points, I would recommend to watch some of the earlier progression videos that I have that led to this point, because it shows how I changed the passive tree over time. So as you get more nodes, more points, you can make changes accordingly. The key ones to start off first is to gun to the right so that you get all the stuff, the juicy stuff passives, and then you should go down, just dip down quickly to get Coming Calamity. This is a huge damage increase. And then after that, from the starting point, you need to branch upwards here to go for precision, to go for resonance. Resonance is mandatory. It makes your build work. Without resonance, you can't have charged stuff. So this is also mandatory. After that, I would recommend going upwards here to go for Thin Ice and Heavy Frost, because this is huge damage increase, and it also makes resistance a non-issue as well. So you don't have to take any passives that pierces resistance or land cool exposure or anything like that. Heavy Frost alone solves all your resistance problem. Note that it doesn't only solve cold resistance. As long as the enemies are frozen, they also have 0 lightning resistance, so this helps a lot. Once you have those, then you fill in the tree. Right after that, I would recommend going up here because you get Echoing Frost and Echoing Thunder. You proc shock and freeze a lot of time, or proc shock and chill I should say. So the 30% damage increase is more or less always up, and this is a huge damage increase. If you are like me and you took +6 to melee skills, then I would highly recommend going for here as well, Conservative Casting. If you don't have that and you find mana to be a non-issue, then save these 3 points. This is really only for mana problems. Then after that, you go down and you get this one here. Falcon Technique alone gives you a lot of % attack speed increase. I'm now at 200 dex, so that's like what, 13-14% attack speed or 15% attack speed, something there. So this alone is huge and instantly makes you into like a whirling demon Darth Maul kind of thing. Then you want to move right because you get the plus 25 dexterity hit here, and then 8% increased dexterity on top of nice evasion. But this combos very well as well. So Bestial Skin gives you 100% evasion rating for your body armor. I'm not so sure whether this combos, but in my mind, I think this gives you more spirit as well because I'm taking Lead Me Through Grace. If it doesn't, then let me know, but even if it doesn't, the 100% evasion sort of doubles the 1400 evasion to 2800, so it's pretty nice thing to pick up. Then after that, it's all bells and whistles, so this one gives you extra effects against bosses, which is always nice. In terms of defense, once you start mapping, you need to pick up defense for survivability because you really don't want to die while mapping in endgame. So first of all, Subterfuge Mask gives you 2 evasion rating per 1 energy shield, so this makes your helmet slot extremely tanky. The next is this one right here, which is Spectral Ward. So Spectral Ward gives you much more energy shield, so these are the only 2 defensive nodes that I picked, and just Spectral Ward and Subterfuge Mask combined with a relatively good helmet gives you a lot of energy shield. So I'm now currently rocking almost 600 energy shield, and the helmet is the only equipment I have that has energy shield. Nothing else has energy shield on it, so it is pretty sizable in terms of defense and survivability. So that's really it. There's still a lot of options as you progress. You could go for more attack, so Blinding Strike here, or you could go for here Killer Instinct for more attack. I haven't picked any crit as well. Crit is also definitely an option if you want to go for a more crit based build. You can branch off quickly to this node here, Deadly Force. You could also branch a bit to the left here to get some crits from here. You can get some crits from here. Moment of Truth is really good, or you can also get crits from here, right down here. So just after your Herald node, just go down a little bit and you can get a bunch of crit nodes as well. So that's certainly an option if you want a bit more crit. And between crit attack speed, it's best to strike some sort of balance between all of them. And I'm still sort of tweaking around. I might let go of some attack speed to go for a bit more attack and crit instead. So it really depends on your taste on how you want to balance between these 3 factors. So the last part here is gearing, and assuming you reach into the end game, how do you actually gear for it? Gearing is actually pretty simple and it's not very taxing overall. There's only a few pieces of gear that is really critical. So the first obviously is the weapon, and even for the weapon you don't have to find those really juicy weapons. For reference, I completed Act 6 Cruel, so the end of the campaign, with a weapon that is 20 levels lower than me. So in Cruel Act 2 I got a new weapon that was when I was level 48, and I used that weapon all the way until I started mapping. So I was even doing tier 1 waystones with a level 48 weapon, and I was obliterating enemies. Then I had a lot of Exalted Orbs from mapping. They dropped like candy there, so I went shopping on the trading site for a new weapon, and I found this only for like 2 or 3, I think 3 Exalted Orbs, and I had to add the sockets and all that once again, but I have a lot to spare, so this absolutely slaps. I'm sort of exploding enemies just by touching them with Ice Strike in mapping. So what do you look for in a weapon? So once you branch out to lightning, the key attribute you want is physical damage. Just stack physical damage as much as possible, because Ice Strike, Charge Staff and your Herald skills all converts physical damage to do their damage respectively. So it ties in nicely with the rune as well, with the 20% increased physical damage times 2. After physical damage, the next thing you want to go for is percent increased elemental damage. You can get even 100% increase, and the one here is a bit low, it's 53%, but it's the best that I can find with 3 Exalted Orbs. The percent increase in elemental damage is a huge DPS increase. And the last one is more optional, so as long as you have physical damage and percent increased elemental damage, that's more or less fine. I also filtered for a +6 to melee skills. This one is a double-edged sword, so +6 skills gives you a lot more damage, obviously, because your skills are all 6 levels higher, but it also requires a lot more mana. So if you're going for +6 to skills, you need to gain mana per enemy killed. So this weapon is nice because it also has that on the weapon, but if you have that on your rings or amulet, then you can go for plus to melee skills. If not, don't bother about it, just go for more damage boosting affixes. That will be sufficient. You can, if you don't have the melee skills, then you can also save on your passive nodes that give you mana regen. But since I took this, I had to spend some points on mana regen instead. So this is the first most important piece. The next is the armor, because the armor is also where you get the spirit form from. For armor, the only thing that matters is evasion. So find an armor that gives plus evasion rating and percent evasion increase. You can find them pretty cheaply on the sites as well. So they usually go for 1 or 2 exalted orbs. If possible, try to get resistances. I have lightning resistance here, which was exactly what I needed. So resistance is what you should look for as a secondary on all your armor pieces. So you don't need anything else on your armor pieces except resistance and life. So if you're looking for secondary affixes everywhere else, always go for resistance, 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 and life. Now once you have these two, the build can start. The third one is the helm. So helm, you want energy shield on it. I found one with both evasion and energy shield, so that the int requirement isn't as high. I only have like 80 intelligence currently. So you want an energy shield helm so that you get the boost in energy shield from the passive as well, and you get more evasion from the passive as well, from the passive node tree. This is the only piece I have with energy shield, and nothing else has energy shield on it. So you do need to find a relatively good helm with good energy shield. Again, usually this goes for very cheaply on the trading site, and really if you don't want to use the trading site as well, you can craft your own very easily. So just find a base with evasion, and then percent increase to energy shield and evasion, things like that, and then use a regal orb to upgrade it, and then add the exalted orbs accordingly, because the secondary isn't really important and you should get resistances most of the time anyway. They roll pretty commonly after evasion. Now the rest of the gear doesn't matter at all, so just find your best with evasion. My gloves and my boots are like 20 levels below me at this point, and I don't bother to change them. So I managed to find these two while I was leveling. They give some nice resistance and life, so I stuck with them. So again, just resistance and life. This belt was actually a quest reward in Act 3 Cruel. Very nice resistance, so I just used that. So you just want to try to cap your elemental resistance as much as possible, and your rings are there to fill in the slots. So whatever resistance you're missing, just find the relevant ring and then equip it accordingly. And my amulet is kind of terrible, but I haven't found one better one, so it is what it is. Yeah, that's it for the equipment.